On July 4, 2026, the United States government will read these words aloud on the National Mall, in front of a crowd that may be the largest in American history. With a single sheet of parchment and 56 signatures, America began the greatest political journey in human history. There will be 60 warships in New York Harbor. There will be fireworks at Mount Rushmore. There will be a military parade of a scale this country has never staged. The White House has called Freedom 250 the greatest birthday celebration any nation has ever thrown for itself. In December 2025, the United States Treasury unveiled the commemorative coins for America's 250th anniversary. A bipartisan advisory committee had spent years on the designs. They proposed Frederick Douglass. They proposed Ruby Bridges, the 6-year-old girl escorted by federal marshals into a New Orleans school while a white mob screamed at her from 3 feet away. They proposed a suffragist with a banner. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent rejected all of it. The coins that will circulate on July 4th will feature pilgrims and founding fathers, history without friction, progress without struggle, a 250-year party with no mention of the people who forced America to keep its promises. There is an FBI letter in this story addressed to Martin Luther King Jr., urging him to take his own life. There is a United States Army general who exceeded his orders and burned a veterans' camp on the banks of the Anacostia River. There is a town in North Carolina where an elected government was overthrown by force in 1898 and no one was ever charged. When I read the Treasury's rejection of the Ruby Bridges coin, one decision, made by one man, I understood what this channel exists to document. Before we get into it, hit subscribe and drop a like. The algorithm actively buries this kind of content. The document being celebrated on July 4th, 2026 was signed by 41 slaveholders. Let's start there. Event 1. The Declaration's Broken Promise, 1776-1865. It is July 4th, 1776. The temperature in Philadelphia is oppressively hot, the kind of summer humidity that makes the air feel thick and close. The Pennsylvania State House, what we now call Independence Hall, is crowded with 56 delegates from 13 colonies who have been arguing for weeks about the exact language of a document that will announce to the world that they are no longer British subjects. The document they are finalizing is extraordinary. Its second sentence is perhaps the most revolutionary claim any government has ever made about the relationship between a state and the people who live under it. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. 41 of the 56 men who signed this document own human beings. Thomas Jefferson is 33 years old when he drafts the Declaration of Independence. He is the author of its most famous sentence. He owns 600 human beings over the course of his lifetime. He is the 3rd President of the United States. He dies $107,000 in debt, the equivalent of several $1 million today, and his enslaved people are sold at auction to pay his creditors. His descendants in the enslaved communities of Monticello live in cabins while he lives in the mansion he designs for himself. His legal wife Martha is white. The woman who bears him 6 children he never publicly acknowledges, Sally Hemings, is enslaved, is his dead wife's half-sister, and is the property of the estate she lives on. When Jefferson frees his enslaved people in his will, he frees 5 of the 600. The founding promise and the founding crime exist on the same page in the same ink, signed by the same hand. This is not a revelation. The abolitionists say it in 1776. The enslaved people living on the founding plantations know it with particular and painful clarity. What makes the Declaration's contradiction worth examining 250 years later is not that it is hidden. It is that the 250th anniversary celebration is being organized as though the contradiction does not exist. The Semiquincentennial Commission's official mission statement describes its purpose as reflecting on the nation's founding values. The America 250 programming includes readings of the Declaration in schools, commemorative events at the Lincoln Memorial, and the military parade that will pass within sight of the National Archives, where the original parchment is stored under glass in a temperature-controlled room. The programming does not include a reading of what Frederick Douglass says about the 4th of July in 1852. Douglas is 35 years old in the summer of 1852. He is the most famous black American alive, a man born into slavery in Maryland who escapes in 1838, educates himself, and becomes one of the most powerful orators in American history. He is invited by the Rochester, New York Ladies Anti-Slavery Society to give a speech for the 4th of July. He accepts. He titles the speech, "What to the Slave is the 4th of July?" His answer is devastating in its precision. He says, "This 4th July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice, I must mourn." He says, "There is not a nation on the earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of the United States at this very hour." He says the Declaration is a sham, and the reason it is a sham is that the founding promise, all men are created equal, is being actively and violently maintained as a lie by the government of the United States. He gives this speech in 1852. It is 174 years before the birthday being celebrated in 2026. The speech is in the public record. It is widely available. It was assigned in American high school classrooms for decades. The Citizens Coinage Advisory Committee, knowing all of this, proposes Frederick Douglass's face for one of the commemorative coins. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent removes it. Bessent is a hedge fund manager, the founder of Key Square Capital Management, appointed to the Treasury by President Trump. He makes the coin decision in December 2025. He does not issue a statement explaining which element of the Douglas design was objectionable. He does not hold a press conference. He does not publish a memo. He removes the coin. In the absence of explanation, the removal is the explanation. No formal accountability mechanism exists for a Treasury Secretary's commemorative coin decision. Bessent continues in his role. The coins featuring pilgrims and founding fathers go into production. The coin featuring Douglas, the man who said what needed to be said about the 4th of July while black Americans were still enslaved, does not circulate. The Declaration of Independence will be on display at the National Archives on July 4, 2026, in glass, preserved perfectly, under controlled temperature and lighting. The argument the document makes that all men are created equal is the argument that Frederick Douglass says in 1852 is a lie. The argument that the coin designers say in 2025 deserves a face on the money circulating on the birthday. The argument that the Treasury Secretary says in 2025 does not deserve to be there. The founding contradiction is not obscure. The founding generation is fully aware of it. John Adams writes about it. Alexander Hamilton acknowledges it. The delegates who fight for the gradual abolition clause that Jefferson drafts and that the Continental Congress removes, the clause that blames King George for slavery, which the Southern delegates refuse, know they are trading a principle for a union. The union happens, the principle is deferred. The deferment is what the next 250 years is built on. What makes Jefferson specifically significant is not that he owns enslaved people. Most of the wealthy Virginia delegates do. What makes him specific is that he writes all men are created equal and knows precisely what he is doing with those words and does not apply them to the people he owns. He writes about the immorality of slavery in his private correspondence throughout his life. He writes that it is like holding a wolf by the ears. You cannot hold on and cannot let go without danger. He does not let go. He dies holding on, $107,000 in debt, and the people he owns are sold to pay what he owes. His granddaughter, Ellen Randolph Coolidge, writes in an 1858 letter, 32 years after Jefferson's death, that she believes the stories about her grandfather's relationship with Sally Hemings are calumnies invented by his enemies. DNA evidence published in 1998 in the journal Nature establishes that a Jefferson male is the father of Sally Hemings' descendants. The historical consensus, updated to reflect the DNA evidence, is that Thomas Jefferson fathers at least 6 of Sally Hemings' children. She is enslaved. She is the half-sister of his dead wife. She cannot consent in any meaningful sense. He never acknowledges the relationship publicly. When he dies, he frees 5 people of the 600. The Declaration promises equality. The coin decision is a small and precise measure of how seriously that promise has been kept. The gap between the parchment and the coin is the subject of this video. Event 2, The Red Summer, America's Birthday in 1919. It is July 27, 1919. The United States is 143 years old. The summer of 1919 is the summer after the end of the First World War. the summer when more than 350,000 black soldiers return from Europe having fought for a democracy they are not allowed to fully inhabit at home. They come back, they expect something. What they get is the Red Summer. Eugene Williams is 17 years old on July 27, 1919. He is a black teenager from Chicago's South Side, swimming in Lake Michigan on a hot summer afternoon. The lake has an invisible racial boundary. The 29th Street beach is for white bathers, the 25th Street beach is for black bathers. Eugene drifts south past the boundary line. A white man on the shore begins throwing rocks. One strikes Eugene. He goes under. He does not come up. When his friends call for the police officer present on the beach, the officer, a white man named Daniel Callahan, refuses to arrest the rock thrower. Instead, Callahan attempts to arrest a black man who accuses the thrower. The witnesses to Eugene's drowning try to stop the arrest. Violence erupts on the beach. It spreads into the city. For 13 days, Chicago is a war zone. White mobs, many of them from a gang called the Ragans Colts, based in the Bridgeport neighborhood, documented in subsequent investigations as having organized the attacks systematically, move through black neighborhoods, beating, burning, and shooting. Black residents arm and defend themselves. 38 people die, 23 black, 15 white. More than 500 people are injured. More than 1,000 black families lose their homes in fires set by white mobs. The number of displaced, burned out, murdered black Chicagoans is not a figure that appears in the official 4th of July programming in any year between 1919 and 2026. Chicago is not the only city that summer. The NAACP documents 26 major incidents of racial violence across the United States in the summer of 1919. In Longview, Texas, a black man named Lemuel Walthall is killed by a white mob, and the school principal, S.L. Jones, is driven out of town for defending him. In Washington, D.C., returning white veterans attack black residents over 4 days while the police watch. In Omaha, Nebraska, a 22-year-old black man named Will Brown is pulled from police custody by a mob of several thousand white men, tortured, shot, and hanged. The mayor of Omaha is lynched briefly himself when he tries to stop it, strung up before being cut down. Will Brown is then set on fire. The worst single episode of the Red Summer occurs not in a city, but in the farmland of Phillips County, Arkansas, near the town of Elaine. In September 1919, black sharecroppers in the area have formed a union, the Progressive Farmers and Household Union of America, to collectively negotiate cotton prices. On the night of September 30th, a group of sharecroppers is meeting at a church when white men open fire on the building. In the violence that follows, a white deputy sheriff is killed. What the federal government does next is documented in its own records. Federal troops are deployed to Phillips County. Their orders are to suppress the violence. In practice, they suppress the black sharecroppers. The Army's official after-action report, produced at the time, describes the troops rounding up black men throughout the county and conducting interrogations under torture to identify the ringleaders of the Union. Men are beaten with leather straps until they confess to a non-existent insurrection. The governor of Arkansas describes the events as a black uprising that has been successfully put down. The death toll among black residents ranges, in historical estimates, from 100 to 800 people. The precise number is unknown because the killings are not investigated and the bodies are not counted. 5 white people die in the events. 12 black men are sentenced to death. 67 more receive prison sentences ranging up to 21 years. The death sentences are eventually overturned by the Supreme Court in Moore v. Dempsey after the NAACP mounts a years-long legal campaign. The convictions are based on confessions obtained under torture. No white person is ever charged. The cover of the Red Summer is not a single decision made by a named official. It is the accumulated weight of a press apparatus that describes a summer of white mob violence against black communities as a series of race riots, a framing that implies mutual combat between equivalent parties rather than systematic assault. The Chicago Tribune's coverage describes the violence as a race war without specifying who starts it. The major national newspapers in 1919 do not investigate the Elaine massacre in detail. The full scope of what happens in Elaine is documented not by the mainstream press of 1919, but by the NAACP and by independent black newspapers, including the Chicago Defender. Ida B. Wells Barnett is 57 years old in the summer of 1919. She has spent more than 3 decades documenting lynching in the United States, beginning with her 1892 investigation of the murder of 3 black businessmen in Memphis, men she personally knew, and continuing through the Red Summer in Chicago. She goes to the south side of Chicago during the violence. She interviews survivors. She documents specific incidents. She publishes her findings in a pamphlet titled The Arkansas Race Riot, which is among the first comprehensive accounts of the Elaine Massacre available to the national audience. She's not a professional journalist in any institutional sense. She is a woman with a printing press and the specific moral courage to document what the mainstream press will not. Her name should be said. She does the work when no one with institutional power is doing it. The specific body count from the Red Summer is not a number that exists with precision in any government document, because the federal government does not produce a government document about the Red Summer. The NAACP's figure of at least 38 dead in Chicago alone, and hundreds or potentially thousands in Elaine, is the most comprehensive accounting that exists, produced not by the government that does nothing to stop the violence, but by the organization that documents it while it is happening. James Weldon Johnson, the NAACP's field secretary, coins the term Red Summer in 1919. He names it. The naming is itself a form of bearing witness when the mainstream institutions of record are not doing so. His name should be said. He names the thing. He is the reason it has a name at all. The federal government's specific role in the Red Summer, the Army's actions in Elaine, the documented failure of federal law enforcement to protect black citizens in city after city, is not investigated by Congress. The NAACP lobbies for anti-lynching legislation throughout the 1920s. It fails repeatedly in the Senate, where Southern senators filibuster every bill. A federal anti-lynching law is not passed until 2022. The federal government's response to the Red Summer is the specific thing worth documenting, because it establishes the institutional pattern that repeats across the subsequent century. President Woodrow Wilson, who is, in his public addresses, a celebrant of democracy and self-determination, is in Paris for much of the summer of 1919, negotiating the Treaty of Versailles, speaking to European audiences about the rights of peoples to govern themselves. He does not make a public statement about the Red Summer. He does not send federal troops to protect black Americans in Chicago or Elaine. He does not call for a federal investigation of the massacres. His administration's Department of Justice does not open a civil rights investigation into the violence. The Attorney General, A. Mitchell Palmer, does investigate the summer of 1919, but his investigation focuses on the threat of radical labor and communist organizing among white workers and immigrants. The Palmer raids, which destroy the American left through mass deportations and arrests, begin in the fall of 1919, the same months after the Red Summer. The government has enormous capacity for federal action in 1919. It deploys that capacity selectively. Black Americans being murdered in 26 cities is not the emergency that activates it. Labor organizers are. This is not incidental. It is the operating logic of the federal government in 1919, documented in the Justice Department's own communications and in Wilson's public record. The government that does not intervene to protect black citizens from mob violence is the same government that will, 13 years later, allow the Army to gas veterans in Washington. The same government that will, 26 years later, conduct a medical experiment on black men in Alabama. The pattern is not accidental, it is institutional. This is the summer of 1919. It is the summer happening in the American calendar, right now 107 years before the fireworks that will light the sky in July 2026. The America 250 celebration has no programming about the Red Summer. The birthday party does not include the guests who were being murdered while it was being planned. Event 3. The Bonus Army, What America Did to Its Own Veterans, 1932. It is the summer of 1932. The United States is 156 years old. The Great Depression is 3 years old. Unemployment stands at 23%. In shantytowns they call Hoovervilles, named for the president who they believe caused this. Americans are building homes from scrap lumber and packing crates. A can of condensed milk costs what some families earn in a day. Walter W. Waters is 42 years old in the spring of 1932. He is an Oregon canning factory foreman who cannot find work. He is a veteran of the First World War, one of more than 4 million Americans who serve in the conflict from which the United States emerges as a world power. Congress has passed a bill in 1924 promising veterans a bonus payment, adjusted compensation for the difference between what they earned in military service and what civilian workers earned during the war years. The bonus is substantial. For the average veteran, it amounts to approximately $1,000, roughly $18,000 in today's dollars. Congress schedules payment for 1945. By 1932, with families starving, the veterans want it now. Waters organizes a march from Portland to Washington. He calls it the Bonus Expeditionary Force. It becomes the Bonus Army. By July 1932, approximately 43,000 Americans, veterans, their wives, their children, have gathered in Washington and built a camp on the Anacostia Flats across the river from the capital. They build it from whatever materials they can scrounge: tarpaulins, tin, wood from demolished buildings. They name their streets after famous battles. They elect leaders, they hold daily roll calls. They are veterans. Order and discipline are things they know. They petition Congress. The House passes the bonus payment bill in June. The Senate kills it. Many veterans stay anyway. They have nowhere to go. President Herbert Hoover orders that the main camps within the city itself be cleared. Washington police move in on July 28th. In the fighting that follows, 2 veterans are shot and killed by police. The specific economic context of the Bonus Army March is worth establishing, because it transforms the marchers from abstract figures in a Depression-era protest into specific human beings with specific grievances that the American government has created. The Adjusted Service Certificate, the bonus, is a promise Congress makes in 1924 in recognition that the men who serve in World War I are paid $1 a day, while their civilian counterparts earn $3 for a day in the wartime economy. The bonus is the government's acknowledgement of this inequity. It is not charity. It is calculated compensation for a specific, documented economic harm inflicted on men who serve at the direction of the government. By 1932, the certificates, redeemable in 1945, have a face value of $3.6 billion in aggregate. Some veterans borrow against them. Some sell them at discount to brokers who speculate on the eventual payment. All of them need the money now, because the Depression has collapsed the economy in which they expected to support their families for the 13 years between 1932 and 1945. The march to Washington is a last resort, not a first choice. Walter Waters, who organizes the Oregon contingent, tries every other avenue first. He tries his state veterans organizations. He tries his congressional representative. He tries the Veterans Bonus Lobby in Washington. When nothing works, he marches. Herbert Hoover is the 31st President of the United States. He orders General Douglas MacArthur to take command of the clearance operation. MacArthur is the Army Chief of Staff, the highest-ranking military officer in the country. His orders are specific: clear the downtown camps occupied by veterans, but leave the larger Anacostia encampment alone. The President's aides deliver this instruction multiple times. MacArthur is given the orders in writing. He ignores them. MacArthur deploys cavalry, infantry, and tanks against Americans who have no weapons. He crosses the 11th Street Bridge and attacks the Anacostia encampment that his orders explicitly tell him to leave alone. Soldiers wearing gas masks fire tear gas at men, women, and children. The veterans run. The soldiers burn the camp. A 2-month-old infant named Bernard Myers dies, apparently from the gas and the chaos of the clearance. A veteran named William Hushka, born in Lithuania, who serves the U.S. Army in the war that makes America the dominant power of the 20th century, dies from a police bullet the day before the Army arrives. A veteran named Eric Carlson dies a few days later from wounds received in the clearance. MacArthur holds a press conference that night. He is wearing his dress uniform. He says the veterans were communists and criminals who were about to seize the government. He says he has saved the Republic. He says the men he has just gassed and driven from their camp were not really veterans at all. This is a lie, documented by journalists who covered the march, who have seen the veterans' discharge papers, who have counted the camp's population. It is a lie delivered in full uniform by the Army Chief of Staff on the night he burns a veterans' camp. The cover is MacArthur's press conference and the White House's subsequent framing of the veterans as radicals. The cover holds imperfectly through the press coverage that follows. The New York Times editorial board writes that the government has acted with appropriate firmness. Most of the major newspapers cover it with varying degrees of sympathy for the veterans' cause, but no follow-up investigation of MacArthur's defiance of presidential orders or the deaths of veterans and an infant. The crack comes slowly through the 1932 presidential election. Franklin Roosevelt wins by a landslide. In 1933, when some veterans return to Washington to try again, Roosevelt's administration meets with their leaders, provides them with food and lodging, and negotiates. Roosevelt's Labor Secretary, Francis Perkins, says the difference between Hoover's response and Roosevelt's is simple. One president sent soldiers, the other sent coffee. The veterans' full bonus is eventually paid in 1936. Over Roosevelt's veto, Congress overrides him. MacArthur faces no charges for disobeying presidential orders. He receives no formal reprimand. He continues to rise through the military establishment. He commands American forces in the Philippines in 1941. He accepts the Japanese surrender in 1945. He serves in Korea in 1950 until Truman fires him for insubordination, a pattern MacArthur repeats across his career without lasting consequence. He is awarded the Medal of Honor in 1942. He gives a famous farewell address to Congress in 1951. He dies in 1964 and is buried with full military honors at the MacArthur Memorial in Norfolk, Virginia. The infant Bernard Myers has no memorial. The veterans William Hushka and Eric Carlson are buried in military cemeteries, their deaths connected in the official record to the events of July 1932, without the specific cause being named in the language that would acknowledge what it was. A United States general gassing United States veterans in the United States Capitol for asking to be paid what they were owed. The America 250 celebration includes a military parade. Military honor is being celebrated on the National Mall this July. On that same ground, in 1932, American soldiers on horseback drove American veterans into the river. The specific irony of the Bonus Army episode, the one that makes it the kind of story this channel exists to document, is the subsequent careers of the people involved. MacArthur exceeds his orders. He gasses veterans. He holds a press conference in his dress uniform and lies. He is not reprimanded. He is promoted. He commands the American liberation of the Philippines. He accepts the Japanese surrender. He runs the American occupation of Japan. He commands United Nations forces in Korea until Harry Truman fires him in 1951 for insubordination, the same pattern, deployed one more time in a different war against a different president who finally has had enough. He is awarded the Medal of Honor. He is given a farewell address to a joint session of Congress that produces one of the most quoted passages in American political rhetoric. Old soldiers never die, they just fade away. He is buried at the MacArthur Memorial in Norfolk, Virginia, in a museum dedicated to his legacy. Dwight Eisenhower is MacArthur's aide on the day of the Bonus Army clearance. He is physically present during the operation. He later writes in his memoir that he advises MacArthur not to personally accompany the troops to the Anacostia encampment, not for ethical reasons, but because he thinks it will be bad optics for a senior officer to be seen personally directing an attack on veterans. MacArthur ignores him. Eisenhower becomes the supreme Allied commander in Europe in World War II, the commander who plans and executes D-Day, the 34th President of the United States, and the man whose farewell address warns America about the military-industrial complex. He never publicly discusses the Bonus Army in political terms. He never expresses regret for his role in it. The veterans who marched to Washington in 1932 asking to be paid what Congress promises them, those men built the American military that wins World War II. Many of the Bonus Army veterans re-enlist when the war begins in 1941. They fight, some die. The promise the government makes to World War II veterans, the GI Bill, the Veterans Administration hospitals, the college tuition benefits, is a direct result of the political lesson the Bonus Army teaches, that veterans will march on Washington again if they are not honored. The GI Bill exists partly because of what happens in 1932. The men who are gassed make the benefit possible for those who come after them. The Declaration of Independence promises the right to petition the government for a redress of grievances. The Bonus Army exercises that right. The government's response is cavalry and tear gas. These two facts exist in the same country, separated by 156 years of the same promise event. 4. Tuskegee, the experiment that ran for 40 years, 1930 to 1972. It is 1932, Macon County, Alabama. The county is one of the poorest in the United States, a stretch of cotton fields and sharecropper cabins in the Black Belt of Alabama where the soil is dark and the poverty is older than anyone alive can remember. The men who farm here are mostly black. They earn almost nothing. They own almost nothing. When a government program arrives offering free medical care, free meals, and free burial insurance, they come. The men are not told what the program is. The United States Public Health Service launches the Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male in 1932. 399 black men in Macon County who have syphilis and 201 who do not are enrolled in the study. The men with syphilis are told they are being treated for bad blood, a local colloquial term that covers multiple ailments. They are not told they have syphilis. They are not told the study's purpose. They receive aspirin, vitamins, and occasional clinic visits. They receive no treatment for syphilis. The study is designed to observe the natural progression of untreated syphilis in black men. The Public Health Service researchers believe, and commit this belief to writing in their research papers, that syphilis progresses differently in black patients than in white patients, and that documenting its natural history in black men will produce medically useful data. This belief is not supported by any sound science. It is supported by the racial pseudoscience of the period, which the researchers accept without examination. In 1947, everything changes for everyone except the 399 men in Macon County. Penicillin is established as the standard treatment for syphilis. The drug is safe, effective, cheap, and widely available. Across the United States, syphilis clinics begin curing patients who in previous years would have gone blind, gone mad, and died. The Public Health Service knows this. The researchers know this. The men in Macon County are specifically excluded from the penicillin distribution programs that operate in the surrounding area. Local draft boards are sent a list of the study participants' names during World War II with instructions not to refer them to venereal disease treatment programs because the researchers need the men untreated. The researchers' correspondence, maintained in the Public Health Service's files, documents this decision explicitly. The men are untreated because the study requires them to be untreated. The study requires them to be untreated because the researchers want to see what syphilis does to a black man who never gets treated. The study runs for 40 years, through the Korean War, through the Civil Rights Act of 1964, through the Voting Rights Act of 1965, through the moon landing, through everything that America accomplishes in the decades the coins will celebrate. The 399 men in Macon County go blind from optic neuritis caused by untreated syphilis. Their hearts are damaged by cardiovascular syphilis. Their nervous systems are destroyed by neurosyphilis. They go mad. They die. Their wives are infected. Their children are born with congenital syphilis. The researchers collect data at each stage. The cover is the classification of the study's internal records and the researchers' deliberate deception of participants, which continues for 4 decades. The study's published findings, which appear in peer-reviewed medical journals throughout the 1950s and 1960s, are written in the passive voice of scientific objectivity. They describe the progression of untreated syphilis in a cohort of black men without disclosing to readers that the cohort has been actively prevented from receiving treatment that became standard in 1947. The papers are published. The peer reviewers do not question the ethics of using human beings as untreated control subjects for a study of a curable disease. The Public Health Service does not question it. The doctors involved continue their careers. Peter Buxton is 28 years old in 1966 when he joins the Public Health Service as a venereal disease investigator in San Francisco. He discovers the Tuskegee study in the course of his work and raises ethical concerns with his supervisors in 1966 and again in 1968. He is told the study will be reviewed. The review recommends that the study continue. Buxton leaves the Public Health Service in 1969. He sends the documentation to journalist Gene Heller of the Associated Press in 1972. Heller publishes the story on July 25, 1972. The study ends not because anyone in the Public Health Service decides to stop it, because a journalist publishes what a whistleblower provides. The congressional response to the 1972 disclosure produces the National Research Act of 1974 and the establishment of the National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects of Biomedical and Behavioral Research. The Commission produces the Belmont Report in 1979, which establishes the ethical framework for human subjects research that governs American medical research today. These reforms are real. They produce genuine protections. They are the direct product of what is done to 399 black men in Macon County. The researchers who run the study and who make the specific decision to exclude participants from penicillin treatment after 1947 face no criminal charges. The lead principal investigators, John Heller, John Cutler, and others, continue their careers in public health. John Cutler later participates in similar non-consensual syphilis experiments on mentally ill patients in Guatemala in the 1940s, an operation not publicly known until a historian named Susan Reverby discovers it in 2010. Cutler dies in 2003. He is never charged. The Guatemala dimension of John Cutler's career, exposed by historian Susan Reverby in 2010, extends the Tuskegee story geographically and in ways that make the international dimensions of American medical ethics failures clear. Between 1946 and 1948, Cutler and colleagues from the Public Health Service conduct experiments in Guatemala in which more than 1,300 people, including prisoners, soldiers, psychiatric patients, and indigenous Guatemalans, are deliberately infected with gonorrhea and syphilis without their knowledge or consent. The experimental methodology is more extreme than Tuskegee's. Rather than observing people who already have syphilis without treating them, the Guatemala experiments involve deliberately infecting healthy people to test the efficacy of penicillin treatment. The research is conducted in collaboration with Guatemalan public health officials and with the knowledge and partial funding of the U.S. government's National Institutes of Health. Reverby finds documentation of the experiments while conducting archival research on Cutler's papers at the University of Pittsburgh in 2005. She contacts the Guatemalan government and the NIH before publishing her findings. When she publishes in 2010, President Obama calls his Guatemalan counterpart Alvaro Colom to apologize. A commission jointly established by the U.S. and Guatemalan governments investigates and confirms the experiments. The commission produces a report. No prosecution is possible. All of the American perpetrators are dead. The Guatemalan survivors and their descendants have no legal recourse in the American court system. Cutler's full career as a researcher, the Tuskegee study, the Guatemala experiments, is the career of a man who conducts non-consensual human experimentation on vulnerable populations across 2 decades and in 2 countries without facing any legal consequence during his lifetime. He publishes papers, he presents at conferences, he retires, he dies, he has no memorial to his victims. President Clinton apologizes in 1997, 25 years after the study ends. He apologizes to the 8 surviving study participants and to their families. The surviving men and their descendants receive a settlement of $10 million, distributed among approximately 6,000 participants, wives, widows, and children. The last surviving participant, Ernest Hendon, dies in 2004. The America 250 celebration honors the contributions of all Americans. The 399 men in Macon County make a contribution. They spend decades as instruments of federal medical research. They are not told what is being done to them. They are not compensated adequately for it. They are not on the coin. The specific ethical framework that the Tuskegee study violates is not a framework invented after the fact to indict the researchers. The Nuremberg Code is established in 1947, the same year the researchers explicitly withhold penicillin from the Tuskegee participants to preserve the study. The Nuremberg Code, produced by the American Military Tribunal that judges Nazi physicians for human experimentation crimes, establishes that voluntary informed consent is the foundational requirement of ethical human experimentation. The American judges who write the code and the American physicians who testify at Nuremberg about the Nazi doctors' crimes produce a document that explicitly applies to American research practice. The researchers in Macon County are aware of the Nuremberg Code. They discuss it in their correspondence. They conclude in memos that are in the Public Health Service's files that the Tuskegee study is different from the experiments that produced the Nuremberg Code because the participants have been enrolled with their apparent cooperation, because the research is not directly harmful in the sense of introducing disease, the men already have syphilis, and because the study's scientific value justifies its continuation. These rationalizations are in writing. They are in federal government files. They document the specific process by which educated, credentialed physicians who know that non-consensual human experimentation is a crime under international standards find reasons to continue doing it anyway. The Belmont Report, the 1979 document that creates the ethical framework still governing American medical research, cites the Tuskegee study as the specific moral failure that demonstrates the need for institutional oversight. Every institutional review board that approves medical research in the United States today exists because of what happens in Macon County, Alabama. The protection is real. The original harm is real. Both things are true. What America does with its black citizens while it is building the prosperity it will celebrate in 2026 is in the files. The files are at the National Archives, the same building that houses the Declaration of Independence Event 5, the coins, what the government erased from its own birthday, 2025. The Citizens Coinage Advisory Committee is a federal body established by Congress in 2003 to advise the Treasury on the design of commemorative coins. Its members are appointed by the Secretary of the Treasury and include art experts, historians, and numismatists, coin specialists. For a commission dedicated to America's 250th anniversary, the committee takes its work seriously. It convenes over a period of years. It develops designs. It applies the standard the anniversary demands, not just what America has been, but what Americans have spent 250 years fighting to make it become. The committee's recommended designs for the America 250 commemorative quarters include 5 themes: the Declaration of Independence, the founding document; the Constitution, the structural framework; abolition, the movement that forced the founding promise to apply to Black Americans; suffrage, the movement that forced the founding promise to apply to women; civil rights, the movement that forced both promises to apply in practice, not just on paper. These are 5 chapters in a 250-year story. They are the chapters that make the story worth telling, not because the promise was always kept, but because enough Americans refused to let it go entirely unfulfilled. The specific design featuring Frederick Douglass shows a portrait of him in the style of mid-19th century engraving, dignified and specific, recognizable as the most photographed American of the 19th century, a fact that is true, because Douglass understood that images of black dignity were themselves political acts in a country that did not widely believe in the existence of such dignity. The specific design featuring Ruby Bridges shows a 6-year-old girl walking. The simplest possible image, a child going to school. Ruby Bridges is 61 years old in 2025. She is alive. She is a public figure and an education advocate who runs the Ruby Bridges Foundation. She was 6 years old on November 14, 1960, when United States federal marshals escort her through a crowd of adults screaming slurs and threats to the door of William Frantz Elementary School in New Orleans. The marshals are there because a federal court has ordered the desegregation of New Orleans public schools and because the state of Louisiana refuses to provide state police protection to enforce the order. The federal government sends its own agents. The 6-year-old girl walks in. Norman Rockwell paints the scene. The painting hangs in the White House. Ruby Bridges testifies before Congress. She has been to the White House. Her face is on a commemorative design proposed by a bipartisan federal advisory committee for the nation's 250th birthday. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent removes her. Bessent is a Yale-educated hedge fund manager, the founder of Key Square Capital Management, who manages money for some of the wealthiest people in the world. He is appointed Treasury Secretary by President Trump in January 2025. His investment record and his economic views are the focus of his confirmation hearings. The question of what historical figures should appear on commemorative coins is not. When the coin rejection is announced in December 2025, it comes without a formal statement, no press conference, no memo released to the public. The committee's designs are rejected. The committee members are not invited to the unveiling ceremony of the coins that will be produced. Their collective absence at that ceremony, documented in the reporting of the New York Times, which covers the coin decision under the headline, "The War on Wokeness Comes to the U.S. Mint," is itself the public statement they choose to make. The coins that will circulate on July 4, 2026 feature the Mayflower's arrival and images of founding-era scenes. History in which the heroes are not complicated. History in which the progress happens without struggle. History in which no 6-year-old girl needs to be escorted by federal marshals through a screaming white mob to exercise a right a federal court has ordered to be made available to her. In October 2025, the United States Mint releases proposed designs for a commemorative dollar coin featuring President Trump. In December 2025, a second proposed Trump coin design is released. If produced, Trump would become the second president in American history to appear on a coin during his lifetime. The first was Calvin Coolidge, who appears on a commemorative coin in 1926, also, as it happens, at an anniversary year for the nation. George Washington is offered the same honor in the nation's early years and declines, saying the practice is too similar to the coinage of kings. The comparison makes itself, a sitting president on a birthday coin in the tradition of monarchs, a formerly enslaved man's face removed from the same coin series. These decisions are made by the same administration in the same month for the same birthday. No formal accountability mechanism exists for a Treasury Secretary's coin decision. Besant does not testify about it. The committee has no legal recourse. The coins go into production. The faces that will be in the pockets of Americans on the nation's 250th birthday are chosen. The faces that will not be there are chosen too. Ruby Bridges walks into William Frantz Elementary School in 1960. She's 6 years old. She is surrounded by screaming adults. She is there because American citizens who believed in the Declaration's promise went to federal courts and won. The federal government sends marshals to enforce what the courts order. 65 years later, a different federal government decides her image does not belong on the birthday money. The specific political context of Besant's decision is the Trump administration's broader campaign against what it characterizes as woke history, a campaign that includes executive orders directing the removal of diversity-related content from federal agencies, the purge of civil rights-era historical displays from federal buildings, and the revision of National Park Service and Smithsonian interpretive materials to remove language the administration characterizes as ideologically biased. The coin decision is not an isolated act. It is consistent with a documented pattern of decisions about which American history will be displayed in which federal contexts. The Citizens Coinage Advisory Committee's membership does not publicly challenge Besant directly by name after the rejection. Their absence at the unveiling is their statement. James Safer, a prominent numismatic expert and committee member, tells the New York Times that the committee is deeply disappointed and that the rejected designs represent the best work the committee has produced. He notes that none of them are invited to the January ceremony at which the replacement designs are unveiled. The attendance list for that ceremony, filed in the Treasury's public communications, includes Treasury officials and their guests. It does not include a single member of the bipartisan advisory committee that spends years developing the rejected designs. The Trump administration's proposed coins featuring the president are covered in the same news cycle as the Bridges and Douglas rejections. The coverage notes the contrast. The administration does not address the contrast. It does not need to. The decision is made. The coins are in production. She is alive. She can read this. She can see what the coins look like. History is not always past Event 6. COINTELPRO, How America Treated the People Trying to Fix IT, 1956-1971. The coins do not feature the civil rights movement. This chapter explains what the federal government was actually doing during the civil rights movement, while the Declaration's promise was being marched for in the streets of Birmingham and Montgomery and Selma. It is August 1956. J. Edgar Hoover has been the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation since 1924, 32 years. He has built the Bureau from a small federal agency into one of the most powerful domestic institutions in the country, with files on hundreds of thousands of Americans, a network of informants that reaches into every significant political organization in the United States and the ear of every president from Calvin Coolidge forward. He has survived Republican administrations and Democratic ones. He has outlasted senators and attorneys general who want him gone. His power rests on the files. The files contain information on everyone who might threaten him. He uses the files. And in 1956, he decides to use the Bureau's full operational apparatus against a domestic political movement that is threatening nothing except the white supremacist order that the FBI has spent its entire institutional existence failing to dismantle. The Counterintelligence Program, COINTELPRO, is established in 1956. Its initial target is the Communist Party USA. By the early 1960s, it expands to encompass the entire American left, with specific and sustained attention paid to the civil rights movement. The FBI infiltrates the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and eventually the Black Panther Party. It does not infiltrate these organizations because they are engaged in violence. They are engaged in nonviolent political organizing. It infiltrates them because Hoover and the FBI's institutional leadership have determined that these organizations represent a threat to the established social order, and that the established social order is worth protecting by any available means. The specific target of the program's most sustained and intensive operations is Martin Luther King Jr. Hoover writes a memo in 1962 describing King as the most dangerous Negro in America. The memo is in the FBI's files. It exists. The FBI places bugs in King's hotel rooms during his travels. It wiretaps his home phone. It wiretaps the SCLC's phones. It collects recordings of his private conversations, including his extramarital relationships. It shares this information with the Kennedy White House and with journalists who might publish it to damage King's reputation. The journalists, for the most part, do not publish it. What the FBI does with the recordings is documented in the Bureau's own files, released through the Church Committee investigation in 1975. In November 1964, after King is awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, the FBI sends him a package. Inside is a letter. The letter, written to sound as though it comes from a disillusioned black supporter rather than a federal law enforcement agency, tells King that he is a fraud, a hypocrite, and a moral disaster. It describes him in the most contemptuous possible terms. It tells him that the enclosed tape recordings will be made public recordings of his private conduct, obtained through illegal FBI surveillance of his hotel rooms. And then it says, "King, there is only one thing left for you to do. You know what it is." The letter gives King 34 days. The FBI is telling the most prominent civil rights leader in America to kill himself, or the FBI will destroy his reputation. The letter is sent to King's SCLC office in Atlanta. His wife, Coretta Scott King, opens the package. She reads the letter. Martin King reads it. He is not destroyed by it. He is not silenced by it. He does not take his own life. He continues marching. He gives the Selma speech. He is assassinated in Memphis in April 1968 by James Earl Ray, a racist who shoots him from a bathroom window at the Lorraine Motel. The FBI's extensive surveillance files on King are sealed by a federal court order until 2027, 1 year after the birthday being celebrated. The specific FBI agent most directly responsible for the letter is William Sullivan, who heads the FBI's Domestic Intelligence Division from 1961 to 1971. He drafts the letter. He supervises the surveillance operation. He retires from the FBI in 1971 after a falling out with Hoover. He is shot and killed in a hunting accident in New Hampshire in 1977, 1 year before he is scheduled to testify before congressional committees investigating FBI abuses. He faces no charges before his death. Hoover dies in 1972, still in office, still director of the FBI, still in possession of the files that have maintained his power for 48 years. Congress responds to the disclosure of COINTELPRO by passing the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act in 1978, establishing a court to oversee domestic intelligence operations. It does not pass any law criminalizing what the FBI does to King or to the hundreds of other organizations the Bureau infiltrates and disrupts. No FBI official goes to prison for COINTELPRO. The files are released. The accountability is not. The civil rights movement exists in the America 250 programming as an abstraction, as a triumph, as a chapter that ends with the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, as a story in which America keeps its promise by 1965 and all that remains is celebration. This chapter documents what the federal government does in 1964, the year of the Civil Rights Act, to the man leading the movement that produces it. It sends him a letter telling him to die. The letter is in the FBI's own files. The same government filing that letter is filing the Declaration of Independence at the National Archives under controlled temperature and lighting. Ruby Bridges walks into school. The FBI surveils the movement that makes it possible. The coin designer proposes her face. The Treasury Secretary removes it. The Declaration promises liberty. The files document what liberty means when its defenders are inconvenient. Event 7, MYLAI, the soldiers America chose to honor, 1968-1971. The America 250 celebration includes 60 warships in New York Harbor. It includes fighter jets over the National Mall. It includes a military parade of a scale the United States has not staged in living memory. This chapter is about what military honor means when held against what it has covered up. It is March 16, 1968. The village of My Lai is in the Sun My district of Quang Ngai province in South Vietnam. The village is a collection of hamlets surrounded by rice paddies, home to farmers and their families, people who live in thatch-roofed houses, tend water buffalo, and have, by the morning of March 16th, survived years of war that has moved back and forth across their province without resolution. My Lai is in an area designated as a free-fire zone by American military commanders, meaning any civilians still in the area are presumed to be Viet Cong sympathizers. The designation exists on paper. The people to whom it is applied are farmers. At approximately 7:30 in the morning, Charlie Company, 1st Battalion, 20th Infantry Regiment, United States Army enters My Lai. The company is commanded by Captain Ernest Medina. The platoon leading the advance is commanded by 2nd Lieutenant William Calley. They have been told that the village is a Viet Cong stronghold and that they should expect enemy resistance. They find no enemy resistance. They find old men, women, and children. The youngest is an infant. What happens next is documented in the testimonies of survivors, in the Army's own subsequent investigation, in the photographs taken by Army photographer Ron Hebrel who accompanies the unit, and in the courts-martial proceedings that follow. Soldiers begin shooting the villagers. They shoot people in their homes. They shoot people trying to flee across the paddy fields. They shoot people being herded into ditches, where Calley orders his men to fire until all movement stops. They shoot children who are trying to run. They shoot an infant. One soldier, a young man named Robert Maples, refuses to fire and is himself shot in the legs by another soldier, who then shoots the children Maples is refusing to fire at. The total number of people killed at My Lai is between 347 and 504. Every historical account agrees on the order of magnitude. The specific number is contested because the Army's initial investigation suppresses the evidence. The official Army report of the March 16th operation does not describe a massacre. It describes a successful engagement against enemy forces, with enemy body count of 128 killed. It reports no civilian casualties. It reports no American casualties from enemy fire because there is no enemy fire. The Army files a false report. The false report is transmitted up the chain of command. Commanders up to and including brigade and division level sign off on it. The cover holds for more than a year. The mechanism is the chain of command's interest in not knowing what its subordinates have done. Officers who receive reports of what happens at My Lai, including reports from the pilot of an Army observation helicopter named Hugh Thompson, who lands his aircraft between Calley's soldiers and a group of surviving villagers, and orders his crew chief and gunner to open fire on any American soldier who continues shooting at civilians, do not investigate. Thompson files a report. His report is received by his chain of command. It produces no investigation. His crew chief Lawrence Colburn and gunner Glenn Andriotta, who actually train their weapons on American soldiers to protect Vietnamese civilians, receive no recognition. Thompson receives a formal condemnation from members of Congress, who characterize his intervention as an act of betrayal against his fellow soldiers. The crack opens through Ronald Ridenhour, a 23-year-old Army veteran from Phoenix, Arizona, who is not at My Lai but who hears about it from soldiers who are. He is discharged in December 1968 and spends months gathering the accounts of soldiers who witnessed the massacre. In March 1969, he sends letters detailing what he knows to 30 people: the President, the Secretary of Defense, members of Congress, the Army Chief of Staff. Most of the letters go unanswered or produce form responses. The Army opens a criminal investigation. Seymour Hersh is a 32-year-old freelance journalist when he receives a tip in the fall of 1969 about a military charge against a soldier named William Calley. He tracks Calley down at Fort Benning, Georgia. He conducts the interview. He writes the story and submits it to major publications. Life and Look magazines reject it. The Dispatch News Service, a small wire service, distributes it. It runs on November 13, 1969, in approximately 30 American newspapers. The massacre is public. Of the 26 soldiers originally charged in connection with My Lai and its cover-up, only William Calley is convicted. He is convicted of murdering 22 Vietnamese civilians and sentenced to life in prison at hard labor. President Nixon, responding to public pressure from Americans who believe the conviction is unjust, who believe Calley is a scapegoat for policies that come from above, orders Calley released to house arrest while his appeal proceeds, 3 days after his conviction. Calley serves 3.5 years under house arrest at Fort Benning before his sentence is reduced, and he is released entirely. Captain Ernest Medina, who commands Charlie Company, is acquitted at court-martial. The officers above him in the chain of command who suppressed the initial reports are never charged. General Samuel Coster, the division commander who signs off on the false after-action report, is demoted and stripped of his Distinguished Service Medal. He retires as a major general. He is never charged with a crime. Hugh Thompson, the pilot who lands his helicopter between the soldiers and the surviving villagers, who orders his crew to protect Vietnamese civilians from American soldiers, is awarded the Soldier's Medal in 1998, 30 years after My Lai. He testifies before Congress about the massacre and describes watching American soldiers throw children into ditches and shoot them. He describes filing his report and watching it disappear. He dies in 2006. His crew chief, Lawrence Colburn, dies in 2016. Glenn Andreotta dies in a helicopter crash in 1970 before he can testify to what he does on March 16, 1968. The military parade on July 4, 2026 will honor American servicemen and women. It should. The vast majority of them serve with honor. This chapter honors the ones who maintain that honor under conditions in which their commanders do not: Hugh Thompson, Lawrence Colburn, Glenn Andreotta, Robert Maples, and names the ones who do not maintain it and who are protected from full accountability by the institution they serve. The specific mechanism of the Army's cover-up is documented in the investigation commissioned by Army Chief of Staff General William Westmoreland in April 1969, when the Army can no longer avoid investigating because Ridenour's letters have been too widely distributed to suppress. The investigation is conducted by General William Peers and his team, who produced the Peers Report, an official Army document that concludes that a massacre occurs at My Lai and that the subsequent cover-up involves officers at multiple levels of the chain of command from company level up to division level. The Peers Report is completed in March 1970. It is a classified document until it is obtained by the press through leaking. The photographs that Ron Hebrel takes on March 16, 1968 are Army photographs, taken by an Army photographer on official assignment. They show the bodies of women, children, and elderly men. They show the massacre in documentary detail. Hebrel retains personal copies alongside the Army's copies. When the story breaks in November 1969, Life magazine purchases his photographs and publishes them on December 5, 1969. They are among the most consequential photographs in American history, images that directly shape public opinion about the Vietnam War and that contribute to the shift in American public support for the war that accelerates through 1970 and 1971. The soldiers who refused to participate in the massacre at My Lai, Robert Maples, who was shot in the legs for refusing to fire, receive no recognition. Their names are not in the Army's official accounting of the day. They are in Seymour Hersh's reporting, in the congressional testimony of survivors, in the historical record that the Peers Report produces. They do what their country's founding document says a person of conscience is supposed to do. They are not on the coin. They are not in the birthday programming. Their names belong in the record. The Declaration of Independence says governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. The people of My Lai governed no one and consented to nothing. They were in a rice paddy. They were shot by an army of the country that wrote that sentence. They are not on the coin. Event 8, the Wilmington Coup, the only successful violent overthrow of an ELECTD American government, 1898. There is a fact about American history that most Americans do not know. In 1898, the only successful violent overthrow of a democratically elected government in United States history takes place in Wilmington, North Carolina. A white supremacist mob seizes the city by force, kills an estimated 60 to 300 black residents, expels the legally elected officials from their offices at gunpoint, and installs its own government. It is a coup. It succeeds. No one is ever charged. It is November 10, 1898, the morning after Election Day. Wilmington in 1898 is an unusual American city, unusual because it has a black majority and a functioning interracial government, a product of the Reconstruction-era political changes that follow the Civil War. The city's government is a coalition of black Republicans and white fusionists, a multiracial democratic arrangement that has been operating for years in the teeth of white supremacist opposition. The mayor is a white man, the aldermen include black men, the police department employs black officers, the city government is elected, it has a legitimate mandate. The people who decide to end this are specific and named. Alfred Moore Waddell is 63 years old in November 1898, a former Confederate soldier and former congressman who has spent years making speeches about the need for white supremacy to be restored to its proper place in North Carolina's public life. His rhetoric is specific. He says that if necessary, white men should choke the Cape Fear River with carcasses. He says this in public. He is believed. In the days before the election, a white supremacist newspaper editor named Alex Manley writes an editorial in the Wilmington Daily Record, the black-owned newspaper he edits, responding to white accusations that black men are a sexual threat to white women. His editorial argues the opposite, that the danger of sexual violence runs in the other direction. The editorial is printed and distributed. White supremacist leaders across North Carolina use it as the pretext for what they plan to do anyway. On the morning of November 10th, the day after the election, Waddell assembles a mob of several hundred armed white men, including members of the Red Shirts, a white supremacist paramilitary organization, at the Wilmington Light Infantry Armory. They march to the Daily Record's offices. They burn the building to the ground. They march to City Hall. They force the elected mayor and aldermen to resign under threat of death. The elected officials resign. Waddell is installed as the new mayor. He has never been elected to anything in Wilmington. He is installed by armed force. Throughout the day and into the following days, the violence continues. Armed white men sweep through black neighborhoods. Black residents, some of whom have been targeted in advance by leaders who circulate lists of names, are shot in the streets, run out of town, or forced to flee into the swamps surrounding the city. The death toll is documented in subsequent historical research as ranging from 60 to 300, with the uncertainty reflecting the deliberate suppression of an accurate count. Bodies are never formally tallied. The violence is never formally investigated. The cover is comprehensive and long-lasting. The white supremacist leaders who execute the coup describe it publicly, immediately, and with evident satisfaction as a restoration of legitimate government, as the removal of an illegitimate black political power structure. This framing is accepted by North Carolina's white press, by the Democratic Party machinery of the state, and by the national press, which covers Wilmington with limited attention and minimal scrutiny of the coup's organizers. The federal government of President William McKinley does not intervene, does not send troops, does not investigate the removal of elected officials by armed mob. The coup's leaders are celebrated in Wilmington for decades. Alfred Moore Waddell serves as mayor until 1906. His portrait hangs in public buildings. Streets are named for the men who lead the coup. The specific architects of the overthrow, Waddell and the Secret Nine, the group of prominent white businessmen who organized the coup in advance, are pillars of Wilmington society in the years after 1898. They give speeches. They attend civic events. They are eulogized. Their names remain on streets and school buildings in North Carolina into the 21st century. The crack in the historical concealment is slow and cumulative. The academic historical record begins to fully document the coup in the late 20th century, as historians with access to primary sources and the analytical framework of Reconstruction-era history reconstruct what happens. The North Carolina General Assembly establishes the 1898 Wilmington Race Riot Commission in 1997, 99 years after the events. The Commission's final report, published in 2006, is the first official state acknowledgement that what happens in Wilmington on November 10, 1898 is a coup, not a riot. The word riot implies mutual disorder and mutual culpability. The Commission's language is more precise. It uses the word massacre for the killings and coup d'etat for the political seizure of power. Commission's report names names. It names Waddell. It names the Secret Nine. It names the organizations that carry out the violence. It recommends specific accountability measures, reparations, monuments, historical preservation, of which some are partially implemented and some are not. No prosecution is possible. All of the perpetrators are dead. The descendants of the elected officials who are expelled from office at gunpoint have no legal recourse. The report is produced, published, and read. The streets named for the coup's leaders mostly remain. The specific planning of the Wilmington coup is documented in historical scholarship based on primary sources, newspapers, personal letters, and organizational records from the period. The fusionist victory in the 1896 and 1898 elections, which produces the interracial government that the coup removes, alarms white Democratic leadership across North Carolina. The state party, under the leadership of figures including Josephus Daniels, editor of the Raleigh News and Observer and later Franklin Roosevelt Secretary of the Navy, runs what historians document as a deliberate white supremacy campaign in the 1898 elections. The newspapers run editorials, cartoons, and stories designed to convince white voters that black political participation is an existential threat to white women's safety and white social order. The campaign produces a Democratic electoral victory statewide on November 8, 1898. But in Wilmington specifically, the fusionist local government is elected independently of the statewide races, and Democrats cannot remove it through the election results alone. The coup on November 10, the armed overthrow of the Wilmington government 2 days after the election, is the mechanism for removing the government that the election does not remove. It is planned. There is a document called the White Declaration of Independence, drafted by Alfred Moore Waddell and the Secret Nine before the election, that articulates the coup's demands, the removal of all black officials and the installation of a white government regardless of election results. The document is published in the Wilmington newspaper on November 9, the day before the coup. The intent is public. The execution follows. The specific federal response to the coup is documented in the correspondence between Wilmington's black community leaders and President McKinley's administration. John Campbell Dancy, the collector of customs at the Port of Wilmington, a federal appointment held by a black man, sends a telegram to Washington describing what happens and asking for federal intervention. He receives no response. McKinley's administration does not send troops. It does not investigate. It accepts what happens as a local matter. The Declaration of Independence states that governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. In Wilmington in 1898, a government that has the consent of its governed people is replaced at gunpoint by one that does not. The people who execute the replacement are celebrated for generations. The principle the Declaration articulates is violated in one of the most specific and documented ways imaginable. The event is not in the America 250 programming. The commission that documents it does not appear on the commemorative coin. The elected officials who are expelled at gunpoint have no memorial. The only successful coup in American history happens 128 years before the birthday being celebrated. It is in the public record. The commission says so. The General Assembly of North Carolina says so. It is the history the coins will not tell. Event 9. The RADIUM GIRLS and the business plot, what American capitalism did in its first 150 years, 1920s, 1930s. The America 250 celebration is sponsored by major American corporations. America 250, the official nonprofit coordinating the anniversary programming, has secured major corporate partnerships and sponsorships from companies in the financial, technology, and consumer industries. The corporations appear in the event's materials as partners in the American story. This chapter is about what the partnership between corporate power and American political life looks like when the documents are examined. It is 1917. The United States Radium Corporation operates a factory at 97 Alden Street in Orange, New Jersey, and a second facility in Ottawa, Illinois. The company makes watch dials that glow in the dark, a product in high demand during a war in which soldiers need to read time at night without flashlights. The paint that makes the dials glow is radium-based, a luminescent compound that uses the radioactive element discovered by Marie Curie in 1898. The company knows from its first days of operation that radium is dangerous. Its chemists and physicists work with lead shields. They wear dosimetry badges to measure their radiation exposure. They follow safety protocols. They do not share these protocols with the women who paint the dials. The dial painters are young women, mostly in their late teens and 20s, earning wages that are good by the standards of factory work in this period. They sit at long tables with small brushes and tiny watch faces and pots of luminous paint. The painting work requires a fine tip on the brush. The supervisors teach them a technique. Put the brush between your lips, use the mouth to point the brush tip, then dip it in the paint, then apply it to the dial. This is called lip pointing. The women lip point their brushes dozens of times a day. They also paint their nails with the radium paint for fun. Some paint their faces and teeth to glow at parties. They are told the paint is safe. The company's own medical director, Frederick Flynn, examines the women periodically. Flynn is not a medical doctor. He has a PhD in physiology. He has no license to practice medicine and no formal medical training in the diagnosis or treatment of disease. He tells the women they are healthy. He tells the press they are healthy. He continues to tell them this as their teeth fall out, as their jaws disintegrate, as their bones fracture spontaneously, as they die. Amelia Maggia is 24 years old when she begins noticing pain in her mouth. By 1922, her jaw is so damaged that her dentist removes a tooth and her entire jawbone comes out with it. She dies in 1922. Her cause of death is officially listed as syphilis, a diagnosis that allows the company to argue her health problems stem from her personal conduct rather than its factory floor. She has no syphilis. The syphilis diagnosis is false. It is applied posthumously to a woman who cannot contest it. Irene Rudolph, Catherine Schaub, Grace Fryer, Quinta MacDonald, and Albina Laris, 5 dial painters who are still alive in the mid-1920s, sue the United States Radium Corporation in 1927. They are sometimes called the Radium Girls. They are so ill by the time of the trial that several cannot sign their names or raise their arms to take the oath. They come to court carried in on stretchers. The company argues that their illnesses have nothing to do with radium exposure, that the scientific evidence is insufficient, that the women are personally liable for their own conditions. The case settles in 1928 for $10,000 per plaintiff plus an annual stipend of $600 and medical care. The settlement is real money for the time. It does not come close to compensating the dying women for what has been done to them. The litigation and the journalism that follows, including coverage by the New York World, which publishes the story of the dying dial painters and the company's deliberate deception, produces the first sustained public debate about employer liability for workplace illness. The Radium Girls case is the foundational event in the legal and regulatory history of American workplace safety law. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration, created in 1970, exists in direct lineage from the legal principles the dial painters case establishes. The protections that American workers have on the job today, the requirement that employers disclose hazards, the right to medical information about workplace exposures, the legal liability of companies whose products or practices cause illness, originate in what happens to the women at 97 Alden Street. The company's executives face no criminal charges. The executives who know radium is dangerous and instruct the women to lip point their brushes retire. They receive no punishment. The women are compensated inadequately and die. The specific medical director, Frederick Flynn, who examines the women, tells them they are healthy and lies to the press, later testifies in the legal proceedings. He is never charged with fraud, with practicing medicine without a license, or with any crime. He returns to academic work. He is later retained as an expert witness by industry groups opposing workplace safety regulations. While the Radium Girls are dying in New Jersey, something else is happening in the boardrooms of American industry. In 1933, a group of wealthy businessmen, including figures with connections to major American financial institutions and corporations, approached retired Marine General Smedley Butler with a proposition. Butler is the most decorated Marine in American history at that point. He has 33 years of service, including operations in Nicaragua, Haiti, Honduras, Mexico, and France. He is the author of a famous 1935 essay, War is a Racket, in which he describes his military career as service to corporate interests. He is approached because his name carries weight with veterans. The businessmen, Butler later testifies, want him to lead a private army of 500,000 veterans in a march on Washington to overthrow Franklin Roosevelt's government and install a fascist regime. The details they describe parallel the fascist movements in Germany and Italy. They want to use the economic crisis of the Depression as the lever. Butler pretends to go along while gathering information. He then goes to Congress. The House Special Committee on Un-American Activities, the precursor to the later HUAC, investigates the plot in 1934. The committee issues a report concluding that the plot is real, that the conspiracy exists, and that named individuals are involved. The report is in the congressional record. The committee names names. The names include executives with connections to major American financial and industrial firms. No one is prosecuted. The committee's findings, despite being in the congressional record, are characterized by much of the mainstream press as exaggerated. The businessmen who are named deny the plot. The plot is real. The congressional report says so. The businessmen face no criminal charges. They return to their industries. The America 250 celebration has corporate sponsors. The corporations in 1933 attempt to hire a general to overthrow the United States government. The corporations in the 1920s kill their workers and lie about it until the workers die in court. These are documented facts. They are not arguments against American capitalism as a concept. They are the history of how American capitalism operates when its interests conflict with the safety and democratic rights of the people it employs and the government it operates within. The Declaration of Independence promises the pursuit of happiness. The RADIUM girls pursue it. They find employment, they find poisoning, they find litigation. Some of them find justice, inadequate and late. The men who poison them find comfortable retirements. The men who try to hire a general to overthrow the government find that nothing happens to them. Butler's testimony before the House Un-American Activities Committee is specific and detailed. He names the individuals who approach him. He names Gerald Mac Geyer, a bond salesman who is the primary intermediary for the businessmen. He names the organizational backing Mac Geyer claims to represent. The committee's investigation partially confirms his account, finding evidence that Mac Geyer makes the contacts Butler describes and that the businessmen behind him are real. The committee concludes in its report that the plot is real and that it involves individuals connected to major financial interests. The reason no prosecution follows is the reason that explains much of the accountability gap across American history. The men involved are too wealthy, too connected, and too embedded in the institutional fabric of American finance and industry to be effectively prosecuted under a legal system that is itself embedded in the same fabric. Their lawyers are too good. Their political connections are too extensive. Their ability to characterize Butler's testimony as exaggerated or misunderstood is too effective in the press. The New York Times characterizes the plot as a gigantic hoax in its coverage. The Wall Street Journal does not cover it substantially. The businessmen walk. Smedley Butler, who goes to Congress rather than to the businessmen's paymaster, receives no formal recognition for what he does. He retires from the Marine Corps in 1931. He publishes War is a Racket in 1935, in which he describes his entire military career as service to corporate interests, protecting United Fruit Company's profits in Central America, protecting Standard Oil's operations in Haiti, ensuring that American corporations' investments in foreign countries are secured by American military force. He names the pattern. He is the most decorated Marine in American history at the time of his death. He dies in 1940. He is buried at Oakland Cemetery in Westchester, Pennsylvania. The businessmen who approach him live out their retirements comfortably. They do not go to prison. They do not lose their positions. History does not remember their names as well as it remembers butlers. That asymmetry between the named whistleblower and the unnamed plotters is itself a form of the cover that protects the powerful. These are not different stories. They are the same story about who the law protects when protecting some people costs other people money. Event 10. What the Declaration actually says, and who is still fighting for it, 2026. This is not the chapter that condemns America. America 250 has enough condemnations and enough celebrations and not enough honest accounting. This is the chapter that reads the document being celebrated and asks what the record of 250 years says about how seriously the document has been taken. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is the sentence. It is in the National Archives. It is under glass. The ink that Thomas Jefferson, who owned 600 human beings over his lifetime, writes is visible under controlled lighting. The sentence is extraordinary. It remains extraordinary. It claims something about human beings that has never been universally true in practice and that requires, in every generation, people willing to fight for its application to themselves. The Declaration also says this: whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government. This second sentence is the one that the abolitionists read in 1840. It is the sentence that Frederick Douglass speaks from in 1852 when he says the 4th of July is a sham for the enslaved. It is the sentence that Susan B. Anthony holds the government to when she votes illegally in the 1872 presidential election and is arrested and convicted. It is the sentence that the veterans of the Bonus Army carry to Washington in 1932 when they ask to be paid what they are owed and are gassed by the Army. It is the sentence that the 399 men in Macon County have a right to invoke against the government that uses their bodies as experimental instruments for 40 years. The people who force America to keep the first sentence's promise are the people who take the second sentence seriously. They are the history that the coins do not carry. The abolitionists, Harriet Tubman, who makes 19 missions into slave territory and brings out approximately 70 people, and who is offered 30 days house arrest in the coin's rejected designs in the form of the abolition theme that Besant removes. Frederick Douglass, who gives the speech that ends. Allow me to say in conclusion, notwithstanding the dark picture I have this day presented of the state of the nation, I do not despair of this country. He does not despair, he continues. He writes 3 autobiographies, he advises presidents, he lives to see emancipation. His face is removed from the coin. The suffragist, Susan B. Anthony, is arrested, tried, and convicted for voting in 1872. She is 73 years old when she gives her last public speech at her 80th birthday party. She says failure is impossible. She dies in 1906. The 19th Amendment, which gives women the right to vote, is ratified in 1920. Anthony does not live to see it. She is on the dollar coin that has existed since 1979. She is not on the America 250 birthday quarter. The suffrage theme is rejected. The labor organizers, the women whose bodies are dissolving from radium poisoning in New Jersey in the mid-1920s, who go to court when their jaws are falling apart, who lie on stretchers in the courtroom and push for a settlement that is inadequate, but that becomes the legal foundation of workplace safety law. Grace Fryer, Catherine Schaub, Quinta McDonald, Albina Laris, and Irene Rudolph, the original plaintiffs, the women who have the specific legal courage to sue the company that kills them, are not on any coin and are not in any America 250 programming, but they are the reason American workers have legal rights on the job. The civil rights movement, Ruby Bridges, who is 6 years old and walks through a screaming mob because a federal court says she has the right to attend the school 2 blocks from her house. She is 61 years old in 2025. She is alive. She runs an education foundation. Her face is proposed for the coin and removed by a Treasury secretary. She does not need the coin to validate what she does in 1960. But the decision to remove her says something precise about the government that makes it. Peter Buxton, who discovers that the United States Public Health Service has been conducting a 40-year experiment on black men in Alabama without their knowledge, and who goes to Congress, and then to the press when Congress does not act. His name should be set alongside every protection that now governs human subjects' research in the United States. Seymour Hersh, who calls a number for a soldier named William Calley in Fort Benning, Georgia, tracks him down and publishes What Happens at My Lai in November 1969, and who receives the Pulitzer Prize in 1970. Hugh Thompson, the helicopter pilot who lands his aircraft between American soldiers and Vietnamese civilians and orders his crew to protect the civilians, who files a report that disappears for a year, who is denounced by members of Congress when he finally testifies, who receives the Soldier's Medal 30 years later. The 1898 Wilmington Race Riot Commission, which is not a dramatic individual act of conscience but an institutional one, a state legislature deciding, 99 years after the fact, that a coup d'etat on its soil deserves to be named and documented and placed in the public record. These are the names that belong in a 250-year accounting. The America 250 celebration will be spectacular. The fireworks at Mount Rushmore will be photographed by millions of people. The warships in New York Harbor will be a sight that does not occur in anyone's lifetime twice. The Declaration of Independence will be on display under glass in Washington. The promise it makes will be read aloud on the National Mall by people who believe in it. Many of them will mean it. The history in this video does not argue that the promise is meaningless. It argues the opposite, that the promise is serious, that its seriousness is demonstrated by the specific people who have died or been imprisoned or been surveilled or been poisoned for demanding that it be kept, and that a 250-year celebration that removes those people from the commemorative coins is a celebration that does not understand what it is celebrating. Ida B. Wells Barnett, who documents lynching and the Red Summer with the specific rigor of someone who understands that the mainstream institutions of record will not do it for her. She is not on the coin, she is in the record she creates. The women who sue the United States Radium Corporation from stretchers in a New Jersey courtroom in 1927. Grace Fryer, whose jaw is dissolving while she argues for the right to legal recourse for what the company does to her body. She does not live to see the full significance of what her lawsuit produces. She dies in 1933. She is 29 years old. She is in the workers' safety law that exists today in every American workplace. Hugh Thompson, who lands a helicopter between American soldiers and Vietnamese civilians in a rice paddy in 1968 and orders his crew to open fire on any American soldier who harms those civilians. He does this in a free-fire zone in the middle of a war under orders that do not contemplate the specific moral situation he finds himself in. He makes a decision. The decision is in the record. He testifies about it to Congress. He is denounced as a traitor by members of Congress. He tells the truth anyway. The 1898 Wilmington Race Riot Commission, which is assembled 99 years after the fact and produces a document that says, in the official language of the state of North Carolina, this was a coup. We are naming it. It belongs in the record. The commission members who produce that report, Larry Umfleet, the lead researcher who spends years compiling the evidence, the commission chairman Dan T. Blue Jr., are doing the specific work of institutional honesty that every chapter of this video is built on the absence of. The Declaration says all men are created equal. The record of 250 years shows what equal costs, what it costs to claim it, what it costs to deny it, what it costs to stand between the two. The cost is specific. It is measured in the bodies at My Lai and the bodies at Elaine and the bodies at Wilmington and the dissolving jaw of Grace Fryer and the 40 years of untreated syphilis in Macon County and the burned camp on the Anacostia River and the FBI letter telling a man who is alive and doing the most important work of the 20th century to take his own life. The cost is specific. It has always been specific. The specificity is the point. The people who stand between the two are the history the coins won't say. They are also the reason the promise is still there to celebrate the pattern across the 10 chapters of this video is not a pattern of accidents. It is not the pattern of a nation that misunderstands itself. It is the pattern of a nation that understands exactly what it is doing, that classifies documents because it knows what is in them, that assigns code numbers to human experimental subjects because it knows their names would be inconvenient, that burns a veteran's camp and holds a press conference in dress uniform because it knows the veteran's cause is just and cannot acknowledge it. That removes a 6-year-old girl from a commemorative coin because her presence in that coin says something specific about what America is and what it still is not. It is not the pattern of a nation that makes honest mistakes and learns from them in good faith. It is the pattern of a nation that makes a specific promise in 1776, establishes specific institutions to manage who that promise applies to and who it does not, and then, when the people outside the promise fight to get inside it, uses those same institutions to suppress the fight. COINTELPRO is not incidental to the civil rights movement. It is the government's response to it. The Tuskegee study is not a failure of medical ethics in isolation. It is the federal government using black bodies as instruments in the same decade that the Civil Rights Act becomes law. The Wilmington coup is not a regional anomaly. It is the founding logic of the Reconstruction-era counter-revolution, applied with particular violence in one city and with particular impunity thereafter. The bonus army is not a Depression-era economic dispute. It is the government's answer to the question of what a veteran's promise is worth when redeeming it becomes inconvenient. The coin decision ties all of this to the present tense. Scott Bessent removes Frederick Douglass from the commemorative quarter in December 2025. He removes Ruby Bridges. He removes the suffragist. He does this for the 250th birthday of a nation whose founding document declares all men created equal. The decision is made without explanation. It requires no explanation. The official version of history does not explain why it omits what it omits. It simply omits it. The people who break that omission open are the reason this video exists. Peter Buxton, who leaks the Tuskegee study, Gene Heller, who publishes it, Seymour Hersh, who publishes My Lai, Hugh Thompson, who files a report that disappears for a year and testifies anyway. The Citizens Coinage Advisory Committee members who collectively boycott the coin unveiling ceremony because their designs are removed without explanation. Their silent absence at that ceremony is a specific act of witness, and it belongs in the record. The New York Times reporter who writes the story under the headline, "The War on Wokeness," comes to the U.S. Mint. The Declaration of Independence will be visible at the National Archives on July 4, 2026. So will the history in this video for anyone who looks for it. The birthday is real. The fireworks are real. The promise in the parchment is real. So is the record of what it has cost to make that promise mean anything for anyone other than the people who were included in it on the day it was signed. History is not what happened. History is what we choose to remember, to teach, and to demand accountability for. The rest is what powerful people hope you forget. Don't forget. If this video reached you, share it, subscribe, leave a comment with the event that hit you hardest. Come back for the next one because there are more.